6 teams on a bye this week, so probably one of the more active waiver wire weeks in your particular league. But Dave, this is not the only 6-team bye week that we're getting.
It's not. There's actually one coming in week 14. So if your fantasy playoffs start in week 15, which most people's leagues do, think about that for a second. The last week of the regular season in fantasy is going to be like this week, where 6 teams are on bye. You better be prepared for it if you still care about your fantasy team by then. There's a couple of teams that I have that are they're cruising. They're going to make the playoffs no problem. But I've got one or two that I'm hanging on by a thread. I might not care about the buys at that point.
Could be some borderline teams at that point. All right, let's start with the big injury news of the day. Jonathan Taylor set to miss a 3rd game this season with the ankle injury. They traded away Nyheim Hines this week, did the Indianapolis Colts. So if you are a Jonathan Taylor owner, what are you supposed to do here?
You're probably going to cry. You're probably going to question why you took him in the first place. Go back and think about how that's worked out for you. It hasn't worked out well for me. And then you've got to do what you can to find somebody off the waiver wire to replace him. Ideally, Deion Jackson would be great. That's the guy who replaced him a few weeks back against Jacksonville, had a ton of touches, including 10 catches in that game. But that was with a different quarterback, and I think it was a game-specific game plan by the Colts. I wouldn't expect him to get that type of reception total against the Patriots this week, but I do think he could get 3 or 4, and that's how many catches he had against the Broncos. He is a number 2 fantasy running back this week, if you need him. But the problem is that he's already been rostered in a lot of leagues, Jeremy.
Yeah.
So if you have to go to the waiver wire to pick up a running back to replace Jonathan Taylor, A, good luck. B, don't watch the games. And C, this is the list. Rachaad White is my favorite on the list. He's available in 40% of leagues. Could mold into a part-time back, and I'm talking like 50-50 split with Leonard Fournette. Right now, he's getting around 7-8 touches per game. He might be the more explosive back at this point in Tampa Bay. Keep your eye on him. He'd be a great stash, but if you're desperate and you need a starting running back, he would make the list. The other 3 names on this list, Cam Akers, we haven't seen him in a while. He's playing Tampa Bay. In theory, it's a decent matchup. Statistically, Tampa Bay's run defense in the last couple of weeks has been really, really bad. So there is an opportunity for Akers, if he gets enough opportunities, to go off and have a decent game, maybe earn that starting role in LA. Again, you can't use Caleb Huntley. If Cordero Patterson comes off the IL, you got to keep your eye on that. And then you saw Zach Moss on the list. That's the guy behind Deion Jackson.
Right.
So if something happens to Jackson in the game, or if they want to take some work off of Jackson and see what they have in their new running back in Indianapolis, Moss would fill in. He's somebody that you can take a look at, and just don't watch the game. Just put him in your lineup if you have to. Sorry that you're in this situation.
Moss, the guy that went the other way in that deal with Nyheim Hines. The Colts 6-point underdogs as they go to New England this week. And all right, Jamal Williams owners, which I was one, had a good week last week, a couple of touchdowns. DeAndre Swift, maybe in for a good week this week, owners. What are you thinking here with DeAndre Swift? What's the latest on his injury?
Well, the latest on his injury is that he's questionable for the game, and I think he's going to play. The Lions are one of those teams that like to list a lot of players as questionable, even though they think they're going to end up being fine. But I don't like what Dan Campbell had to say about DeAndre Swift after the last game. He only had 5 carries in the game, and he said that he might have had 1 carry too many. They're going to have to monitor him during the game. Jamal Williams is the better running back in Detroit to start. Williams is a number 2 running back for me, more of a top 15 running back as well. In games he's played with Swift this year, there's been 4 of them, he scored 2 touchdowns 3 times. So if you follow along with that, all you need to know is he scored a ton of fantasy points. You're going to start Jamal Williams. Swift barely makes the cut. Honestly, he's not even worth calling a number 2 fantasy running back. If this were a week where all the running backs were healthy and no one was on a bye, I don't even know if Swift would be a number 3 running back. Right now, we've got him ranked as a consensus as a top 20 running back. My prediction is that that falls, and by the time you get to Sunday, we won't feel good about starting Swift, and neither should we.
And there were questions about him in the HBO series in Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
Questions about Swift and I don't want to say his toughness, but just his desire to kind of get in there and get yards. And now you're seeing it with Jamal Williams coming to the fore. Let's stick with the running backs. By the way, Lions 3.5-point home dogs to the Packers this week. Let's stick with the running backs. Arizona have been running with Eno Benjamin, but interesting about Benjamin is that he hasn't eclipsed 40 yards in 5 of the 6 games that he's played. He's only gone over that once. Could we see James Conner come back this week?
He practiced all week on a limited basis. It's looking pretty good that he will get the chance to play. The question is whether or not he actually will. So this is going to be a game time decision in Arizona. If he plays, I think we're going to see a split between Connor and Eno Benjamin. I think Eno's earned it. Not that he's been amazing week after week. You really just said it, Jeremy. He hasn't had a lot of games with huge numbers, but we did see it against New Orleans. He showed some explosiveness. He's a decent pass catcher out of the backfield. He is somebody who could be a factor on passing downs for Arizona. And maybe even if they're trailing in this game against Seattle, you could see more Eno Benjamin and James Conner. I would expect that Arizona would take it easy on Conner in his first game back, not load him up with a lot of carries and catches, but when they get inside of the 10-yard line, I think that's when you'll see all James Conner territory. If he plays, he is a low-end number 2 fantasy running back.
And you see Eno Benjamin there, 18 in terms of the consensus top 20 rankings. The Cardinals 2-point favorites at home to Seattle. You have Kenneth Walker going in that game. That's going to be a good one there. Baltimore Ravens play on Monday night versus New Orleans. What about Gus Edwards?
It doesn't look like he's trending in the right direction either, and he's got the hammy injury that's slowing him down, so we'll wait and see on him. That means that Kenyon Drake would be the starter for Baltimore again. And given this week, and again, how many players are on bye or hurt, Kenyon Drake suits up as a number 2 fantasy running back this week. Not one you're going to love, but I think the opportunities will be there against the Saints. We've seen the Saints defense look great one week, horrible the next. I think the Ravens offensive line is starting to come into form. We know their defense is going to be a lot better. That could force some short fields that help Lamar Jackson and company get near the goal line. That would obviously help Drake, who's had a couple of explosive runs as well. I always like to lean on running backs that play with rushing quarterbacks because defenses have to cater to both of them when they decide to take the snap. And I just look at Kenyon Drake as somebody who could take advantage of that. Hasn't had a ton of work, but if there's no Gus Edwards on the field, maybe he does get his way to 15 carries.
And as you said, he has showed some explosiveness in that offense, the limited opportunities he has had.
He had a terrible game 2 games ago.
Right.
But that was when Gus Edwards was getting back into the mix. Hopefully, if Gus Edwards is out, I think you see Kenyon Drake step up and have a good game.
Let's stick with the Ravens here because there's also concern about Mark Andrews did not practice for a second straight day. They play on Monday, so what's your level of concern with Andrews not at practice on Friday?
Pretty high. I'm getting nervous about him, and they're going to have a practice on Saturday. If Mark Andrews does not practice on Saturday, I would imagine he won't play in the game. And I don't know how effective he'll be even if he does play in the game at this point. So I would get nervous if I've got Mark Andrews. You've got to have a contingency plan at tight end. And the most obvious one is in Baltimore. Their rookie tight end, Isaiah Likely, who stepped up and had a lot of work last week against Tampa Bay. And I'll tell you what, he looked great. Had 77 yards, had a touchdown. He's a good moving tight end, meaning that he's not a blocker. He's a pass catcher. He's more of a receiver. In fact, he lined up in the slot nearly 60% of the time last week. I would expect him to see some decent target volume, and we know that Rashad Bateman, out for the rest of the year in this offense, maybe he carves himself a role where he ends up being a full-time player in Baltimore's offense. I've stashed him in a bunch of leagues. I highly recommend you guys do the same. By the time we get to Sunday morning on FFT, I bet he's a top 12 tight end for all 3 of us.
Stay with the tight ends, talking about Darren Waller. I mean, the season has not gone the way that Las Vegas fans certainly hoped. We thought we had big hopes for this offense, but this offense is just not able to produce. They're so inconsistent.
Yeah.
What is going on with Darren Waller?
Well, with Waller, it's the hamstring injury that's been sidelining him, and we don't know when he's going to be back, but he's practiced this week. There's a chance that he plays in week number 9, and it's against Jacksonville. It's a pretty decent matchup, but I feel like if we're starting Darren Waller in fantasy, we're doing it based on what he's done for us in the past. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you're just looking for a tight end who can get you 60 yards with a shot at scoring. Waller would certainly be that top 10 tight end if he ends up being active.
Raiders are 2-point favorites as they